I want to start today with a small story. It's something we usually don't focus on at a place like NextCon, where we love to talk about the big stuff. But it's a story about three things. It's about Radio Shack, it's about a 95-cent book, and about thinking small, not big. But it's also the story, the true story, of how I helped build a $2 billion company. Back in March of 1991, Polycom's co-founders, Brian Hinman and I, were on another urgent run to buy components. We had known each other for years. When we decided to form another company, it was to build things now that let people communicate not only with video, but however they wanted. So we called it Polycom. Our goal was more than just bringing together audio, video, and content. We wanted to build things that brought people together. We wanted to vanish the spaces between us. Now, startups have a lot of ideas for a lot of directions, and we did too, but we decided to start with audio. Not long after we built this prototype of a, can we get the slides up? Oh, I'm sorry, they're over there. This is NextCon. Not long after we built this prototype of a wireless microphone, we realized that for our first product, we needed something with a wider appeal. Something like a super speakerphone, better than anything that ever existed, would be just the ticket, we thought. But it needed a speaker better than anything that ever existed, too. And that speaker haunted my dreams. You know how it is. You want to believe that there is a solution to some giant roadblock, but you don't have a clue what it might be. And then there we were one afternoon in Radio Shack, running through our shopping list, when I glanced up at their bookshelf and noticed this little red book with the unglamorous title, Building Speaker Enclosures. It was less than $1. Now, I know that Radio Shack is not considered much of an inspirational stomping ground at the moment, but from the 1970s until the 1990s, it was one of Silicon Valley's creative epicenters. It seemed they sold everything, from phones to computers to amplifiers to transistors. Radio Shack fed the soul of Silicon Valley, and Radio Shack people were my people. We loved making things. We loved taking things apart, sometimes putting them back together again. Radio Shack stores represented an entire generation of tinkerers and builders because, like they say, big things come in small packages. Yeah, it's a cliche, but cliches are often true. Why should this matter to you as a founder or a leader? Well, it matters because today we're surrounded by what feels like an unending flood of big things, of multi-million-dollar investments, of billion-dollar acquisitions, of product launches with tens of thousands of users right out of the gate. Big things feed our egos. They sound impressive and they can make great stories, but they can also crush us. Because in this atmosphere of the big, we lose sight of why small things matter and the difference they make in business and in life. This temptation can be even stronger for those who have experienced big things for themselves. In the aftermath of a big success, it's easy to assume that we're now special. We've now got the knack, so we can abandon the small things and go straight to big. And then we wonder why big dries up. Well, it's that danger of losing our companies and ourselves, that is why I want to talk with you about how my team built this $2 billion company by thinking small. Executive summary, I only have 2 points: developing small and living small. Ready? Okay, let's talk about developing small. One of my favorite examples of developing small was when Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs built a blue box. If you've been in telco long enough, you remember these. Anyone? Yes, right, 2600 hertz, right? Yes. A blue box was a homemade electronic gadget, I'm sorry, I get excited by this stuff, that simulated a telephone switchboard operator by generating the same secret tones the telephone companies use to control their own networks. And on one occasion, these two guys used a blue box to prank call the Vatican and impersonate Henry Kissinger. The whole idea that you could hack something as complex as the global telephone system was really exciting to Brian and me. Unfortunately, it was too bad we had to build a speaker, not a blue box. And the problem was our knowledge of speakers was pretty much limited to what we had casually picked up in hi-fi stores and playing with radios. For one thing, we thought that speakers had to be big to get the kind of good fidelity and low distortion that was essential to our plan. And that was where this cheap red book came in. It explained the concept of acoustic suspension, and we realized that approach was exactly what would solve the problems of our new creation. Acoustic suspension gave us the secret of a sealed speaker enclosure, and that let us isolate it from the microphones, but still contain everything inside the same enclosure. This isolation was a breakthrough in the product's performance, and we got it from that book. Every free moment Brian and I had was devoted to bringing our dream to life. In the early days, our lives revolved around, sketches and circuits and customer conversations and acoustics and software. We built our first working model of the speaker in a weekend using plastic panels from the hobby shop and hot glue and a cheap paper speaker. Other breakthroughs, all the other little things, came from a variety of sources. But fitting them together so they all worked together perfectly didn't come from any kind of mathematical genius. It came from music. When I was 4 years old, my mother, who's an organist, became my very first piano teacher. She taught me how those black dots and horizontal lines could be read as melody, timing, even chords, even emotion, and she encouraged me to practice. Now, going over the same thing over and over isn't always that much fun, especially when the taskmaster is your mother, but I did slowly get it, the muscle memory and the understanding, and with that came something unexpected, love. When the notes become a part of you, and you find your imagination has a direct conduit to sound, you suddenly become free to love what was once a burden. And the same is true in business. Whether you're creating a product, a sales strategy, a marketing program, yes, you have to be a skilled technician, whatever your discipline. You have to put in those often thankless, endless hours of repetition and refinement, but you also want to build a gut understanding of what you're doing. A vision that extends beyond the notes and quotas and algorithms. Some people do just follow the notes. Some people follow their hearts. Greatness comes from doing both. It was only by merging those two, the science and the art, that we were able to create something really exceptional. Of course, a new idea rarely comes with cash in its pockets, so we build up each new version by scavenging the debris from older versions. If it was quiet enough in the small office we moved into, we could do an audio test. If not, there was always 2 a.m. when the rest of the world was asleep. As Steve Jobs famously said, it takes a lot of hard work to make something simple, to truly understand the underlying challenges and come up with elegant solutions. And that's a principle that has been known, maybe not always acted upon, but known for hundreds of years. The principle that it's always simplicity that shines, not complexity. So you can see why every new iteration of our products has been driven not just by making them do more, but also by letting users do less. Let me give you another example, not a product this time. Pixar's CEO, Ed Catmull, tells the story of how early on they found the rectangular tables in Pixar's meetings were hurting creativity. People felt like the center seats were the power seats, and the people sitting at the outside toward the end, they felt like outsiders, so they didn't contribute as much. But Pixar's belief was in unhindered communication, and they realized they needed to fix this. So what did Pixar do? Did they send their entire team away for a seminar on unhindered collaboration? No, of course they didn't do that. Did they invest in a major internal communications campaign with signs all over the billboard saying unhindered communication? No, they didn't do that either. No, they knew that the problem was the rectangular table. So they stopped meeting at a rectangular table. They started using a square one. We came to the same realization when designing our newest video collaboration solution. We also realized that more and more meetings are breaking out of those long, formal meeting rooms and conference tables and happening in the round, in open spaces, in normal rooms. Because after all, in communications, the point of any device or service is to not be noticed. It's to become so simple that the technology becomes invisible and the experience feels totally natural. I'm getting ahead of myself. From all those small things, the loudspeakers and algorithms and user conversations and industrial designs, came the big things. In 1990, Polycom was founded. 2 years later, we unveiled our first product. By the close of 1992, we'd earned our first $1.4 million in revenue and grown our company from 2 to 50 employees. By 1998, we reached $100 million in annual revenue. 2 years after that, we hit $100 million in a single quarter. Then in 2008, we crossed the $1 billion mark. And as of last year, our market value was set at $2 billion. Today, Polycom helps more than 5 million people in almost 500,000 organizations around the world defy distance. Hydration. Thomas Edison once said, "Genius is 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration." He was right. But for too many people, that 1% inspiration is treated not only as the big idea from which a great company or product can be built, but the point at which the journey is nearly complete. What Edison meant was that while that bit of inspiration is the kernel, it's the centerpiece, genius can't even get up to bat without all the perspiration, the other 99. And that other 99%, those are the little things, the details. There's another advantage to addressing the little things. Going small rescues us from two big dangers. Number one is the belief that we have to create everything from scratch. It's easy to be drawn into a mindset where not only is our vision unique, but every element of it must be unique as well. But one of the fastest ways to innovate is by finding components that are already available and putting them together to form at least a model or prototype. Rarely do you need to invent everything. The raw material is already out there, or even within your own company, waiting to be tweaked, updated, and combined. And this is just as true for offerings, for services, for sales, as it is for products. So much of what you need exists already. Mining your own organization or finding good content out there in your market should be your starting point. The number two danger is our obsession with having everything perfect from the very start. Now, we know we can't have everything at once, right? You can't have it all. Sometimes we lose sight of that. During development and initial releases, the question, is it enough, should be your litmus test for thinking small. Will it do the job? Does it enable and delight my users? Does it convey my company's vision? Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, put it like this: if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. Now, yeah, I hope I'm being clear here. Knowing when something's enough is all about focusing on quality, not quantity. Don't ship something that does a crappy job of a lot of things, but shipping something with a minimal, tightly focused set of features so you're controlling the quantity, but done really, really well, so you're emphasizing the quality. That is a recipe for success. This approach lets you iterate, get the details right, and understand the real needs before you go too far. You don't want to be sinking yourself into some expensive and time-consuming project that in the end just doesn't connect with the market. This approach enables even enterprise-level businesses to build the right product or the right program or strategy, one tiny but validated step at a time. Whatever you do, do not miss this. Big things happen because of small things. Edison's 1% inspiration demands the full 99 of perspiration. If all you do is go big, you'll never actually get there. Now we've talked about developing small. Second, living small. You've all heard the proverb, don't sweat the small stuff. I know that what that's trying to get at, but it's nonsense. Life is the small stuff. The thing is, some of the ways we live small are bigger than others. In his bestseller, The Power of Habit, Charles Duhigg introduced what he calls keystone habits. Keystone habits say that success relies on identifying a few key priorities and fashioning them into powerful levers. I've talked about how small applies to products and plans, but the truth is, it matters even more in the way you run your business. Take collaboration as an example, because it's how we can all get the best from every person and every tool. Collaboration is a good thing, but adopting collaboration as a core value will only get you so far. It has to be implemented if it's going to become a keystone habit. For example, I've learned that one of the best ways to implement collaboration for myself happens at the close of pretty much every presentation or meeting I'm at. Once a presenter is finished, I'll think about who's on the team. I'll choose one, say Cynthia, and I'll ask the presenter one question. What did Cynthia think of this? Asking that one question does two things. One, it forces me to learn the names and faces of the people involved. I'm really bad at names and faces of people involved. Make a note of that, really bad. So it helps keep me in practice. But also, the leaders are reminded that I expect them to get input from their entire team, not to make their decisions in isolation. Again, to make the distances between them smaller. And another of my keystone habits has come to revolve around the little word, no. One place that shows up, I will only call people back who I really want in my life. Now, okay, so I'm chief evangelist for a company whose core business is human communication, right? A co-founder. It sounds ironic, I know. But unfiltered communication is a massive productivity killer, especially as more and more people discover your name. You know these messages. Hey, Jeff, I'm Gilligan. I'm sending you this spam to be sure you saw the spam I sent you last week. So, yeah. So filtering has become one of my keystone habits. Thank you very much. And some of these, it's all the countless, the seemingly insignificant patterns, like making the bed, exercising, practicing the piano, or writing for a half hour every day, that creates life. Life itself emerges from tiny decisions and habits. And some of those become keystone habits, the ones that create really powerful effects, the really big payoffs you'll almost never see coming until they do. Last year, my father died. He was a healthy man. He was still walking, driving, bragging about the 100 push-ups he did every day. He was pulling weeds in his backyard in Los Angeles when he tripped on the hose, fell and broke his neck, but it didn't kill him. After he was rushed to the hospital, doctors were able to stabilize him and fix up his neck, but they said this was only just the beginning of a long and painful recovery. He was facing weeks, maybe months in a hospital. They weren't sure that he would ever heal completely. He was 94 years old after all, and the doctors explained to my mom and me that there could be other complications as well. But one of the immediate side effects of this kind of break, it's called a hangman's break. It's right at the base of the skull. And one of the things that means is that you can't swallow. He was flat on his back and heavily sedated. My dad couldn't communicate. He wasn't conscious. So the doctors gave my mother and me a choice. Should we insert the feeding tubes down his nose, they asked, or put a hole in his stomach wall and feed him directly? Now, this kind of intervention was something he always hated. And that's a huge decision. It's one of those decisions we dread, but it is the kind that comes for every one of us at some point. But it was the wrong question to decide. The right question was not where should we put the tubes, but should there be tubes at all? And the thing is, making that big decision did not come from big things like studying the philosophy of life, studying the meaning of death, wrestling with the enormity of something so hard to wrap our heads around. The answer came from the small things, from the kind of life my father had lived. His hobby of rebuilding old Mercedes diesel engines, his being a radio man in the Second World War, his giving me a 400-volt power supply when I was 9 years old, from which I learned a lot. That's me hiding from the flash. He grew up a farm boy, but graduated from Stanford with a degree in radar engineering. He was always doing stuff, always busy, always living. So my wife, my mother, and I talked. We went back to the small things that made up my dad's life, and we realized that what he would have wanted wasn't inserting tubes, but to go home. 4 hours later, hospice did just that. My wife talked to the ambulance crew, and they told her that when they pulled up and he saw the house, my father, who couldn't talk, had such a huge smile on his face. He knew he was going home. We set up the bed in his study. Our decision, that decision, like huge problems and decisions that all of us face, was a hard step to take. But my father went out the way he wanted, surrounded by the pictures, the books, his ham radio on the desk, and his family that he loved. In the end, The problems we face in our businesses and our lives feel big. They are. And I know how overwhelmed, how lost, how hopeless it can feel. But in the darkness of that moment, there's only one thing you need. Faith, said Martin Luther King Jr., is taking the first step even when you don't see the whole staircase. And that's the real strength of thinking small. All you need is the first step. That's it. For your business, maybe that means scheduling a meeting with your key players. The simple act of putting it on the calendar. Maybe it means reaching out for help from a mentor or a coach. Making a call or sending off a single email. For your life, maybe you're facing a broken relationship or some decision that feels like the end of the world. It might mean nothing more than writing a note without explanation, without an agenda. Or maybe it just means telling the people in your life you love them. My story, just like the overarching story of all innovation and success, turns not on the headline-making big things, but on the small, nearly imperceptible things on which they're built. And really, that's the best thing about that 95-cent book I picked up from Radio Shack 25 years ago. You see, what we need aren't giant answers to giant problems. All we need is small. Thank you.